Hey, everybody. Welcome to our Registered Aquaculture Export Facility webinar, specifically focusing on our Premises Freedom Evaluation Package. Thank you all for joining, and as Stacy mentioned, this is recorded, so I did get a message from a few folks that they weren't able to attend, but we will be recording, so you can just message Lauren and I afterwards. Give us maybe a day or two to get the recording ready, but we're happy to share that. So I'm going to go ahead and dive in. All right, so I wanted to start off just talking about the new process for Premises Freedom Evaluations and the timeline. And we can talk a little bit about the different sections to this package and their purpose. Then we'll go more in detail about how to complete each section, and then finish up with some additional information and resources. I'm going to be referring to some of the changes that we're making with the RAFE 2.0. This is the Premises Freedom Evaluation Package is part of those changes that will go into effect on next Monday, September 18th. But I'm not going to go into full detail about some of the other areas of the RAFE 2.0 program because we went into those, we discussed those on this past Friday's webinar. So if you weren't able to attend that or you want a refresher, that was also recorded, and I should have a link available soon. So we're just going to focus on Prem Freedom here and how it ties in with the aquatic animal export process as well as rates. All right, so let's first start with the new process and timeline. So the Premises Freedom Evaluation Package is our new process for documenting that a facility meets premises freedom prior to export. So this is, at this point in time, this is just for export, for international export. And so it's going to be whether or not a facility needs to meet premises freedom will be based on the countries that they want to export to. So some countries either require premises freedom or allow for premises freedom level testing for pathogens of concern prior to meet the export requirements of that country. Premises freedom requirement, we use that as sort of a general term, but the way that we're defining whether or not premises freedom is required or not for a given country is stated on the health certificate, or if there isn't a health certificate, other written documents like an import permit. So some of the language that you may be seeing on health certificates are, I put some examples here on the screen. So the premises is free of epizootic hematopoietic necrosis virus, or the animals originate from a farm found free during the last 24 months from, and then insert pathogen. Or originate from an export premises determined by the competent authority to be free from, or the establishment was considered free from. These are all quotes from actual health certificates that we have negotiated on the IREG. And so it may be worded on the health certificate slightly differently from country to country or commodity to commodity. We try and be as consistent as possible, but it may be worded slightly differently. So if you have any questions about, hey, does this language mean premises freedom? That's an excellent question to reach out to your local APHIS office for to help them clarify. So the requirements on the health certificate, these health certificates, if you've been endorsing, if you've been issuing health certificates with these statements on them in the past, then you have, as the accredited veterinarian, been certifying that the exporting facility or the exporting population meets premises freedom for the pathogens of concern to that country. And that health certificate is a legal document. So this the Premises Freedom Evaluation Package is a new process for us to kind of really walk through the details of what premises freedom means, and then also documenting that the facility is meeting those requirements. So the Premises Freedom Evaluation Package is designed to improve our guidance and documentation of this process. It's both from the accredited veterinarian documenting that these various benchmarks are being met at the facility, but it's also something for APHIS. We're using it as documentation for our purposes when we're endorsing health certificates, or if we were to be audited by a trading partner, and we have documentation of that oversight. So within the package, the goal is to identify benchmarks for how to obtain and maintain premises freedom. Some examples include how to collect and sample animals for testing, how to achieve sampling target, identifying the pathogens of concern to a particular facility, and mitigation procedures that are in place to prevent pathogen introduction into the facility to maintain that health status. So this is a flow chart that we discussed during our webinar last Friday. We have a workflow like this for each of the different facility types, including a race production facility inspection that also needs to meet premises freedom. These workflows will be posted on our webpage once that goes live shortly. But for the purpose of today's webinar, I just want to focus on two areas, primarily the areas that have to do with premises freedom. So for all of under the RACE 2.0 program, we have most approvals have 5 steps. So the first one being the pre-inspection documentation, then followed by the facility inspection, followed by an initial review of the documents, a final review of the documents, and then the actual issuance of the letters. So for premises freedom, there's going to be this premises freedom evaluation package that the accredited vet fills out and then goes to the export office, and we'll walk through the details of just what that workflow and timeline looks like specifically for the Prem Freedom package. But I wanted to share this slide to show you that it's also working in concert with the RAFE approval as well. So we'll go into more detail about that in a second. So specifically for the Prem Freedom package, this is a really high-level overview of the process. So the accredited veterinarian is going to review the package. We highly recommend that the accredited vet is doing that in consultation with the aquatic animal health team of the facility, if there is one. The accredited vet is then going to certify that the requirements for Prem Freedom have been met. Either the accredited vet or the facility then submits that premises freedom evaluation package to APHIS at our local endorsement office. APHIS will then review that package and then issue a premises freedom letter. And then this process repeats annually. So this is part of our RACE 2.0 update, so this process will officially go into effect on Monday, on the 18th. All right, so steps to completing the package. For the accredited veterinarian, these are just some buckets of what will go into in more detail. So reviewing the requirements, so making sure that the sample collection and frequency test methods are being done correctly, determining premises freedom design prevalence, whether that's 95% confidence, 2% prevalence, or 95% confidence, 5% prevalence. We'll talk a little bit more about how you choose and identify which design prevalence you're meeting. Then reviewing a testing history for the past 24 consecutive months, verifying that that testing is meeting these prem freedom requirements, so looking at the lab reports, identifying the pathogens of concern, and then verifying critical control points are in use and effective within the facility. Then for APHIS, this will be the APHIS VS office that oversees the state or the region where your facility is located. So they will review the completed and signed premises freedom evaluation package for completeness. And then based on the information in that package, will then issue the premises freedom letter. And again, this is repeated on an annual basis. It's up to the facility if they want to do both their annual RAFE inspection and premises freedom letter at the same time every year, or if it works better to stagger them. We're not being prescriptive about when it has to be done. It just has to be done on an annual basis, and then repeated, before the expiration date the following year. Okay. So where do you find the premises freedom evaluation package? So this will be posted on our new webpage, which should be live shortly, our live aquatic animal export resources webpage. So when it's that time, if you're a new facility that wants to export under premises freedom and you need to fill out this package, you'll go to our website to find it. If you're renewing a previous approval, then that's where you'll also find this package to complete on an annual basis. Once you complete it, then once the accredited vet signs and completes it, they will submit it to our APHIS VS office. So it will depend on where the facility is located. Lauren, do you mind just popping into the chat our VS contacts webpage? So we have a webpage that you can go to, look up your state, and it will tell you exactly what office covers that area. And then once we've gone all the way through the Prem Freedom package, how do you use that Prem Freedom letter? So the premises freedom letter, it should be then submitted with every export health certificate for APHIS endorsement if you need to demonstrate that you are meeting the premises freedom requirements for export. So we'll go through an example at the end. I just wanted to make sure we highlight sort of these three things before we go into more detail about the package and completing it itself. And then we'll have an example at the end that will sort of wrap all of this up. All right, so just to highlight for our new process and timeline, we have this new process for documenting a facility meets Prem Freedom. The veterinarians responsible for verifying Prem Freedom requirements have been met and is the testing that they have when they're signing this package. The premises freedom evaluation package should be completed annually, submitted to the APHIS Veterinary Services Office that covers that region, and APHIS will then issue an annual premises freedom letter. More information, documents, and to find your local office is all on our various APHIS web pages, which throughout this presentation we'll put into the chat. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit more about the specific sections and what the purpose of each section is in this premises freedom evaluation package. So we have three parts. One is really focused, I'm calling it testing, but it has to do with sampling and the actual testing that's being done. The second part is what the pathogens of concern to the facility. And then the third part is focused on critical control points. These are all part of, a single package. It's just, they're all part of the single Adobe PDF that will be posted, but these are the three different parts. So for the testing section, we want to make sure that we're verifying that testing is compliant with our premises freedom definition, the APHIS premises freedom definition, or country-specific requirements. And some of the things that we're looking to verify are that the sampling and collection and pooling of samples is done correctly, that we're meeting that design prevalence, whatever that may be for the facility, such as 95% confidence, 2% prevalence, that the testing is being done at an APHIS-approved laboratory, that this, all of the sampling, collecting, that kind of thing is being done under the supervision of the accredited vet, et cetera. We'll go through the exact details in the package, but that's sort of the purpose of this first section, is making sure that we're getting all those components that we have to make sure are being met, that impact the testing that we're doing, to then be able to say, the testing component of Prem Freedom is complete and is being met. So then for the second section is pathogens of concern. So here in this section, we're going to identify which pathogens the facility is choosing or meets premises freedom for. This section will be completed per susceptible species. And so there may be more than one for a given facility. If they have more than one species and both of those species are meeting premises freedom for a given pathogen. And the number of pathogens that are selected will completely depend on the facility. We have some facilities some of our shrimp producers that have to meet 5 to 10 different pathogens for premises freedom to export to the markets that they're interested in. We have some of our goldfish or koi facilities where they only have to meet one pathogen or maybe two. So there's no minimum, maximum number. It's really what makes the most sense for the facility, and also that the accredited vet can verify Prem Freedom is being met for those pathogens. So it includes both WOA-listed pathogens or pathogens listed by the World Organization for Animal Health, previously the OIE, as well as non-WOA-listed pathogens. Okay, so for the critical control point section, the purpose of this section is to verify that the facility has mitigation or biosecurity protocols in place that are preventing pathogen introduction through the 5 common pathways or critical control points. So looking at animal pathways, water, feed, fomites, and vectors. Okay, so for this, just to highlight, we have 3 different parts: testing, pathogens of concern, and critical control points. And that the facility needs to meet all 3 of these components to be able to obtain and maintain premises freedom health status. Now let's go into a little more detail about completing each section. All right. So I'm going to, this is a working draft of our premises freedom evaluation package. The final version, as I mentioned, will be posted on our new aquatic export resources page. So at the very beginning is just some general information about the facility. So whether or not this is a new request for Prem Freedom or a renewal. And so the accredited vet will select which one applies to the facility. Then the accredited vet will indicate the period, the 12-month period that this approval, this annual Prem Freedom package applies to. So for example, let's say this is an existing facility that has met Prem Freedom and they're just submitting their annual package. They would say, from May 1st of 2022 to May 1st of 2023. Those would be the dates. So they're going to be dates in the past, not dates in the future, because you're looking at every time you're filling out one of these packages as the accredited vet, you're looking at the last year. Now, to meet premises freedom, you have to meet 2 years worth of testing history. We'll go into that in a little bit more detail, but the intention of this section is to highlight what is the last year that you're verifying when you're submitting this. Company organization name, the RAFE approval number, the physical address and mailing address of the facility, the contact person and their contact information, your information as the accredited veterinarian. And then we start in with the certification statements, which also are kind of is a combination of the certification statements as well as the requirements or links to requirements. So for the first one, to work with aquatic animals for export certification, you have to be both a Category 2 USDA accredited veterinarian, as well as licensed to practice veterinary medicine in the state where the facility is located. You have to have a valid veterinary client-patient relationship with the facility. You are, as the accredited vet, is attesting that they have reviewed the APHIS premises freedom definition and understand the testing and biosecurity components required for a facility to obtain and maintain premises freedom per APHIS. I'll open that document in a second and we'll walk through a few of the details in there. And then, then we talk about how to identify a single population and then some information about testing. So let me open our Prem Freedom definition first, just to start with that, and then we'll go into more detail about each of those components. Okay, so here is our premises freedom definition that's on our webpage. Lauren, if you don't mind putting the link in the chat, that would be awesome. And so this is currently on our webpage, but also will be moved to the new webpage that will go live soon. So it will all be in one location. There's some general information at the beginning about authority, definitions, but where I'm going to start is focusing on the steps to establishing premises freedom. So there are 5 steps here that have to be completed over 2 consecutive years, 24 consecutive months, and then maintained moving forward. So this first part is talking about the pathogens. We'll get to that in a second. The testing, we'll get to the type of laboratory in a second. I'm going to scroll down to number 4 here. So number 4 is identifying the number of distinct populations on the premises. We've had some conversations about this during other webinars. And this is really where you as the accredited vet and the aquatic animal health team are going to sit down and begin figuring out, okay, how many populations do we have? How many animals do we need to test? And really kind of laying out your plan for what targets you need to meet in order to meet premises freedom or maintain premises freedom. So this first question is about how many populations on the premises. We've discussed in the past and that most facilities, most exporting facilities probably only have 1 population on the premises because they're sharing tanks or they're sharing water or they're sharing personnel. And there's just, there's opportunities for pathogens to move within the animals in a given area on the premises. There may be some cases where if you have a separate area for just broodstock that has its own water and dedicated personnel, that could be its own population. But for most facilities, I would say that there's a single population on the premises. If you have questions about the facility that you're working with, or if the details of your given facility, you're unsure of where you fall, please reach out to us. That's something that we can help you determine, or at least give you some of the, talk about the specifics of your facility to give you an idea of what it would look like if we were considering it one population versus more than one. So however many populations you decide are on the facility, on the premises, the testing and the biosecurity and all that, and the premises freedom evaluation package needs to be completed for each population. So if you only have a single population on the premises, then you're just filling out one package, and you're calculating all of your numbers for testing based on the entire population of that premises. Whereas that would look a little bit different if you have two separate populations. You would be calculating your sample sizes differently. You'd be making sure that you're meeting, the biosecurity critical control points are in place to keep those two populations separate, as well as maintain the health status within them. All right. So then let's say we've determined that we have a single population. The next step is, developing what are those targets that you need to meet. So the first part here is talking about sample size. So you're going to need to know how many animals do you need to sample? Like, what should you be reviewing on the test results in order to make sure that you're meeting those targets? So we talked a lot about, this section includes information about the diagnostic sensitivity of the test. There are some tests that we have out there for aquatics that have an actual, reported diagnostic sensitivity, but in most cases, it's unknown. So in that case, we assume the diagnostic sensitivity is 85% when we're doing our sample size calculation. We'll also want to determine the confidence level that we're looking at, whether for the APHIS premises freedom definition, it should be 95%, and the pathogen prevalence detection threshold should be 2% or lower. So when we say 95.2 or 95% confidence, 2% prevalence, that's what we're referring to here with number 2 and 3. So I will show you when we go back to the Prem Freedom package in just a second, I'll show you where you will select which design prevalence you want, but that is something that you need to determine before you determine what your sample size will be. So once you know the diagnostic sensitivity, your confidence level, and the pathogen prevalence level, then you can enter all of that into our animal sample size calculator. So this is a calculator that APHIS has. It is not specific to aquatics. We use it for poultry and any other terrestrial species. So it's the same math regardless of the commodity type. So let me just pull that up 1 second. So Lauren, if you don't mind putting this, the link to this webpage in the chat, that would be great. So this is our VS, Veterinary Services Outbreak Surveillance Toolbox. This is where we keep our sample size calculator. If you come down here to sample size tables, you can select animal sample size table. Okay, so there's going to be a couple of areas that we'll need to fill in. So let's say for this example that we need to meet 95% confidence, 2% prevalence. So for our confidence level in the calculator, we'll put 95. One second, let me make sure I can edit this. One second. Here we go. All right, so for the calculator, for confidence level, we put 95%. Let's say that we don't know the diagnostic test sensitivity. So this will vary based on the pathogen. So let's say that, for epizootic hematopoietic necrosis virus, we don't know the diagnostic sensitivity, so we'll put 85. Maybe we do know the diagnostic sensitivity in some cases, and in which case maybe it's 92. Like you have the ability to type in whatever that diagnostic test sensitivity is. In most cases, as I mentioned, most of our tests aren't validated and we don't have that number. So our default is 85. So 95% confidence, our diagnostic sensitivity is 85. And then the x-axis here is showing us our prevalence threshold for the disease. So we talked about how we want to meet 2%. And so we're going to look at the 2% column. Then over here on the y-axis, this is the total number of animals in the epidemiological unit, which basically translates in our case to how many animals are in the population. So for a lot of our facilities, a lot of our aquaculture facilities, they have thousands, if not millions of species, of animals. And whereas some of our other facilities, maybe there's, just a select group of fathead minnows that, is a breeding nucleus, and they only have 500 animals, or maybe they only have 200 animals. Whatever your population size is, you can follow down this y-axis to find the total number, and then you come across to find the 2% column. So let's say that we have that we have 20,000 animals. So we found 20,000 here on the Y, and then on the x-axis, we go under 2%, and we see that we need to do 175 samples. I'll make this a little bit bigger, apologies. 175 samples, animals need to be sampled in order to meet 95% confidence, 2% prevalent, and at a diagnostic sensitivity of 85%. So this is how you use this calculator to determine what your sample size needs to be. There is a link in our premises freedom definition directly to this calculator, but the one that's posted on our website right now is broken. So the updated version that we'll have on there in just a short time, we'll have the correct link. So if you get an error, that's why. And hopefully we have that in the chat. If not, I can provide it afterwards. So that's how we determine the sample size. And then the rest of the premises freedom definition talks about animals for sampling and some other things which are covered also in the Prem Freedom package. So it's important to review this definition and some of the details that are in here. In most cases, it will apply to what you need to meet premises freedom, unless there are country-specific requirements. So let's go back to the package and I'll show you the rest of these statements. So C here was that you reviewed the Prem Freedom package, and then we determined that there was a single distinct animal population, so we're only going to fill out one of these packages. Attesting that the animal and water flow patterns and the critical control points within the facility, especially with respect to pathogen introduction, are being addressed and are being identified. And then E here is we're going to make one of two selections. So the accredited veterinarian is going to select with consultation with the aquatic animal health team whether or not the facility is seeking Prem Freedom evaluation based on the APHIS definition for prem freedom, meeting that standard, or per a destination country's requirements. So in most cases, the APHIS premises freedom definition is based on the OIE or WOA. So in most cases, if there is a reference on the health certificate that says, these animals meet prem freedom per OIE or per WOA, or if there's no criteria listed, just, that the animals meet premises freedom for this disease, then you're going to want to select this first option. There are a few countries that have their own parameters for how to meet premises freedom. So there's two examples that come to mind. One is some of our certificates to Peru. They require, the option for premises freedom on those certificates is 95% confidence, 5% prevalence. So in that case, the facility doesn't need to meet the APHIS definition, which is more stringent at 2% prevalence. They can have, they can achieve premises freedom by meeting the 5% prevalence if they're only planning to export to, say, Peru. So in that case, for Peru, they could put 95% confidence, 5% prevalence. And then if you want like for Peru, just as a note. So there's the option to meet that country level prem freedom or our default APHIS definition. Another example is Canada. So Canada requires 95% confidence, 2% prevalence, similar to our definition, but the individual parameters and details of how Canada wants a facility to, what a facility needs to do to meet prem freedom for Canada are slightly different. So for example, with our APHIS premises freedom definition, once you identify the sample size, you're testing, you're doing 2 testing surveys a year over 2 years, whereas Canada has an option once you've established premises freedom that you can cut down to once a year testing. So if the facility only needs to meet prem freedom to go to, say, Canada, then you can put, 95 to like per Canada in this option. Now, APHIS will then use this information as we're issuing your premises freedom letter. So depending on which one you select, should meet your market needs for export. And your letter will say that this facility meets premises freedom at per the APHIS definition, or at 95% 5 for the following species for the following pathogens. So that's how APHIS is going to use this information when we're creating your premises freedom letter. All right, so let's just say that we'll stick with the default with the APHIS definition for now. All right, this next the next part is verifying that for all of the pathogens we select in part 2, that all of them during the past 12 consecutive months, so we're issuing this package on an annual basis. So for the last 12 months, that the testing and the sampling has been done to meet either the 95% confidence, 2% prevalence per the APHIS definition, or the alternative design prevalence like we described above. So, 95% 5 for Peru or Canada or something like that. All right, then this next section gets into verifying that all of the testing for the pathogens of concern in this package meet the following criteria. So the sampling plan and the animal collection need to be conducted under the supervision of the accredited veterinarian. The animals that are collected should be representative of the entire population at the premises. So that means that, let's say you have 3 different species that are all susceptible to spring viremia carp, making sure that with your sampling for premises freedom, that you're sampling animals from all that are representing all 3 of those different species. And so how do you determine if a species is susceptible? So there's 2 ways. One is, the OIE, or the WOA Manual for Diagnostic Tests for Aquatic Animals, or also referred to as the Aquatic Code or Aquatic Manual, will say, we'll list at the very beginning of each pathogen chapter, these are the species that are considered host species, or susceptible species for a given pathogen. In some cases, you may see a list specific to a certain country. We definitely have some trading partners that that either have their own list of what they consider susceptible species to their pathogens of concern, or have, if it's a non-WOA listed pathogen, have that listed on their individual country specific list as well. So that's where, when you're looking at, okay, I know that I need 175 samples twice a year for this hypothetical population, then looking at susceptible species, looking at each of the species you have on the premises, determining, are any of these species susceptible to my pathogens of concern? If so, making sure that when we're doing sampling for testing, that we're hitting animals from each of those species. We also want to make sure that while we're aiming for each of the susceptible species on the premises, that we're also looking at the different life stages. So that also comes into when we refer to representative sampling. So if you have everything from brood stock to egg, or if you only have maybe just a grow out population, juveniles or adults, making sure that all of the life stages that are on the premises for those susceptible species are being included in your sampling plan. Because as we know, some pathogens prefer some life stages over others. Some pathogens are, more, may present with clinical signs in some species not with others. So that's why we want to make sure that all of the testing that we're doing has the most meaning. So we can say from those numbers, okay, we've looked at all of these susceptible species, we've looked at all of these life stages, we're taking all of these into account with our testing, and therefore when our testing comes back negative and we're doing it for those 24 consecutive months, over that 24 consecutive months, that we can have confidence that means that we've actually determined, and we can actually say that with 95% confidence, of detecting a pathogen at 2% or more, that we would have identified it in that population. And that's the threshold that we're aiming for. We also want to make sure that with our sampling plan that we're prioritizing morbid animals because they may be more likely to be infected. So if those are present during sampling, make sure to include those in your sample numbers. All of the testing needs to be conducted at an APHIS-approved lab. I'll make a change to that, an APHIS-approved lab, or using an APHIS-approved method at an APHIS-approved lab for WOA-listed pathogens. We have specific guidance on, if you're looking at a health certificate and you don't know, does this need to be tested? Is this a WOA-listed pathogen? That kind of thing. So we have export testing guidance that's on our website. Lauren, if you don't mind popping that into the chat as well. That specifically goes through if the certificate says something along the lines of X, Y, and Z, then that means that it needs to be at an APHIS approved lab, or it needs to be at an approved lab. So that can vary from health certificate to health certificate. Specifically, if the facility is planning to export to a country using premises freedom, then all those WOA listed pathogens of concern that they need to meet for export need to have been tested at an APHIS approved lab. And the list of APHIS approved labs is also part of that guidance. For non-WOA listed pathogens, then the testing can be done at either an approved lab or a recognized lab per our guidance. So specifically, because APHIS is only approving labs at this time for WOA listed pathogens. So that's why specifically with those, they need to be done at APHIS approved lab. Let's say that you're having testing for maybe 5 different salmonid pathogens, and they're all WOA listed, and then you have one non-WOA listed pathogen. You can test all of those at the same laboratory, at the same APHIS approved lab. The last part here, as far as testing, is that if there's any pooling of tissues or animals, that they're done in accordance with our APHIS premises freedom definition, or APHIS criteria for establishing prem freedom. At this point, APHIS has criteria for shrimp specifically. We are working on putting together APHIS guidance for some of our finfish and possibly mollusks. But there are a couple of different references that you may want to look at. So for shrimp, we have our APHIS guidance on shrimp pooling, depending on the life stage and how big they are, how many you can pool to be able to still have confidence that you're meeting those sampling targets. In the case of some of our finfish species, especially if they are susceptible to a WOA listed pathogen, then within each WOA chapter of the aquatic manual, there is a pooling section, which often says something along the lines of, pooling up to 5 animals is okay. Or in some cases, it says pooling isn't evaluated. So it will depend, but there may be some guidance within the WOA chapters for some of the pathogens as far as when you can pool or when you can't pool. But it's not across the board for all of them. So you want to make sure that, like, when you're sitting down to develop your sampling plan, and here are my pathogens of concern, that you're looking to see if there's any guidance as far as how those samples that you're going to collect can or maybe can't be pooled. There may also be country-specific requirements. In some cases, Canada doesn't want pooling for certain pathogens, testing for certain pathogens. So you want to take all of those things into consideration when you're sitting down as an aquatic animal health team and with your accredited veterinarian to make sure that you're ticking all those boxes that you need to be able to meet the prem freedom and the export requirements for the markets that you're interested in. So that's kind of the end of the testing specific information that is in this premises freedom evaluation package. The next couple of statements I'm just going to go through, and then we'll move on to the second section talking about pathogens. So the accredited vet is also verifying that the facility has biosecurity practices in place for critical control points for each that address each of the pathogens that are selected. So, for example, if a facility is seeking premises freedom for, say, a parasite and a virus, then potentially the pathways of introduction for that parasite or that virus may be different. And so making sure that we're taking that into consideration. They probably have some shared pathways, like, bringing a new animal in could bring both that parasite and that virus. but maybe, the virus is transmitted, vertically. So if there's no, pathway for vertical transmission, then we can think about slightly different critical control points in the case of that pathogen. But again, we want to look at all of the pathogens of concern, what are all of the different pathways, and making sure that we're identifying those critical control points. And again, that's in section 3. We'll talk a little more detail about that in a second. So the accredited vets verifying they've completed the critical control point workbook for the pathogens of concern and have submitted it as part of this package. The accredited vets attesting that they will provide to APHIS upon request any documentation or analyses on which these attestations are based. So what that means is once you have identified your sampling plan and you're doing your sampling and you're sitting down, after a period of time to look at the test results to make sure you're meeting your target. How the facility, how the aquatic animal health team, how the accredited vet want to organize that data is entirely up to you. In some cases, we have facilities that have software that's tracking their lab results, and so they can kind of query those lab results and pull out a report. In other cases, there's a single spreadsheet that some facilities are using. Some facilities have multiple spreadsheets that they're using. Whatever system works best for your facility, you're more than welcome to use. But at the end of the day, it just needs to be a system that allows you to sit down and actually be able to have all of the numbers in front of you and be able to confidently say, okay, we're hitting these targets. We're hitting these targets for sampling. We're hitting these targets for, the first batch of sampling for the year, the second batch of sampling for the year. We're hitting these targets from year to year and be able to see those trends. And making sure also that that those data are showing you that you have a representative sample, that you're hitting all of the susceptible species, all of those kinds of things that we've talked about up until now. So that analyses or, that system for organizing those data is entirely up to you. But if APHIS were to ask, can you please share that with us, or please walk us through what your system looks like because we have questions or concerns, as you're agreeing to share that information with APHIS upon request. Also, as the accredited vet, you're conferring with the aquatic animal health team, if there is one, regarding all of the declarations that you're making with this package. That you will report directly to the APHIS area veterinarian in charge for the region where the facility is located if there are any reports of either a suspect or a positive lab report, if there's observations of pathognomonic visual evidence or clinical signs of any of the pathogens of concern, if you have any unusual morbidity or mortality. The reason that the accredited vet is responsible for reporting that to the AVIC is in case APHIS needs to do a follow-up investigation, but that also directly could potentially impact the premises freedom health status of the facility. Excuse me. So then this last part here, M, is understanding that the accredited vet needs to keep records and documentation supporting the testing and biosecurity claims for at least a period of 3 years, which will also be available to APHIS upon request. Number 9 is that if APHIS, you're agreeing that if APHIS finds any errors or shortcomings in the testing data, lab reports, biosecurity, that a Prem Freedom letter will not be issued until those concerns are addressed. And if you're renewing your approval and there's issues identified, that your Prem Freedom recognition may be suspended until APHIS can do maybe get some additional information or do a follow-up investigation if that's necessary. It may not be, and just understanding that if there are breaches to your biosecurity or to your testing that threaten the premises freedom health status of your facility, that may impact your ability to export internationally if you need to meet Prem Freedom for that pathogen or pathogens to go to that country. And lastly, just understanding that to maintain Prem Freedom, this testing isn't a one-time thing. This biosecurity isn't a one-time thing. Once it's in place and established, you need to maintain it from year to year. All right, and then this is just the information for the accredited vet to sign this package. There's some information here just talking about the 3 different sections. We'll go into section 2 and 3 in just a second. Okay. So with that first section on testing complete, now we're specifically looking at the pathogens of concern. So as this form indicates, you're going to complete one of these tables per susceptible species. So if you, for a given pathogen. So there's some examples here to kind of show what does that actually mean. So a single table could be completed if you say only have one species. You're sending Vaname or you're getting premises freedom approval for Vaname. They're the only susceptible species you have on the premises to say, in this example, Tora, yellowhead, and IHHND. Or maybe you have multiple species that are all susceptible to the same pathogens. So maybe you have some Atlantic salmon and rainbow trout that are both susceptible to VHS and gyro. In that case, you can just use a single table for the pathogens of concern. Now, let's say that you have species on the premises that are susceptible to different pathogens. What that basically means is that pages 5 through 8, you would just repeat for each species that you're looking for. So you complete those pages. In this example, we have koi that meet Prem Freedom for spring viremia of carp, and we have bass that meet Prem Freedom for red sea bream iridovirus. So in that case, you would complete one of these for the koi, and then you would complete a separate table for the bass. Okay, so you put in this section here, you put the species, scientific name, and common name, and then you're going to select all of the pathogens of concern. So the way that this table is broken down is you have, starts with fish, so you have your WOA listed pathogens first. Then you have non-WOA listed pathogens, which are, common, either commonly or, are sometimes required for premises freedom level testing for those pathogens is required to some countries. So that's what the other section is, the non-WOA listed pathogens. And then basically that is repeated for mollusks and then crustaceans. So we tried to list a lot of the pathogens that are either already on export health certificates or facilities are already meeting Prem Freedom for, but then you'll see down here at the very end that there's a place for you to add additional pathogens. If you need to add more than 4, you can just write them in down here, or you can, you can just write them in down below. If for some reason it won't let you edit, just reach out to your APHIS office and we can help you add that extra space. So again, what I said earlier is that the number of pathogens that a facility wants to submit as part of their certification, that they're saying we meet Prem freedom for these pathogens of concern, that number is entirely up to the facility. It's possible that they may only have one, and that's completely fine. It's possible that they may have, I don't know, this species is susceptible to all of those. I didn't really look at the pathogens I was doing that. It may not make sense necessarily, but you get my point, is that really the number of pathogens is entirely up to the facility, and that for each pathogen, the facility needs to be able to demonstrate that they're meeting that level of testing and the biosecurity, which we'll talk about in a second. So that is section part 2 of this Prem Freedom evaluation package, which is hopefully fairly straightforward. And then I'm going to move on to part 3 here. So these are the critical control points. So this portion of the package is, there's going to be, you complete one of these critical control point workbooks per population. So in our hypothetical right now, we only have one population, so we'll just complete this once. There's some general information here at the beginning about, what to do if you have different populations and different water sources and that kind of thing. And it just sort of, it gives some examples, but we'll walk through each section together. So the first critical control point is focusing on animal sources. And the first part is indicating how many distinct populations are on the premises. So in this case, we have one. Let's say we had 2, we would put 2, but then it would ask us to identify the name of this population, and then the facility, the accredited vet, would need to submit, as I said, a separate Prem Freedom evaluation package for that other population. So for this, we'll just say 1, and then this can be left blank if there's only one population. And here's the required portion of this critical control point. So are only animals of equal or higher health status introduced to the facility? So this means that all the incoming animals are being tested at the level you indicated before. So let's say you are seeking Prem Freedom, you're testing that you're meeting Prem Freedom at 95% confidence, 2% prevalence. Then by answering yes to this, it means that any animals coming into the facility are also meeting that 95% confidence, 2% prevalence for all of the pathogens of concern in the table. So let's say you are testing that you meet Prem Freedom at 95% confidence, 2% prevalence for 5 different pathogens. Any incoming animals also have to meet that level of health status or higher. So the answer to that should be yes. And in order to do a test that you're meeting Prem Freedom requirements. The next question is, does the facility maintain health records for at least 3 years for all incoming animals to show they are equal or higher health status? So that's also a requirement to make sure that not only are they coming in, but that you're also maintaining that documentation for 3 years. So the answer to that should be yes. You should be able to meet that requirement. The next critical control point is water source. So for water sources, you can have one. There may be one on your facility. There may be 5 or more. If you have more than 5 water sources, please reach out to APHIS and we can give you additional space to input that. But let's say we have 2 water sources. One is going to be a well, and the other is municipal water source. And those are the 2 that we're using on this hypothetical facility. So we're going to complete one of these critical control point tables per water source. So this first one says water source number 1, which corresponds to our well. So does the influent water originate from a protected source with no plausible exposure to or contamination with the pathogens of concern? So in this case, we have our well is a secure water source. It's a deep water well that does not have, any access to surface waters or anything like that. So there's no plausible exposure that the water coming up out of that well could be bringing or contain pathogens of concern. So in this case, the answer is yes. If the answer to this first question is yes, then you can move on to the next table. I'll show you how we'll complete it in the next table when it's no. So for water source number 2, is our municipal water source. So we're not entirely, the facility may think that probably it doesn't have any pathogens of concern, but there's some potential, maybe the way that the water is coming in and where it goes before it gets to the actual tank or pond there is a possible means of exposure to the pathogens of concern. So let's say the answer to this one is no. What that just means that then this next part is that you need to describe what mitigation steps are in place to make sure that that municipal water source is not going to be a source of pathogen introduction to your animals. So maybe it is, chlorinated. You are also passing it through filters. I'm just doing some shorthand here, not writing it all out, but and you do, UV sterilization or something like that. But basically making sure that, okay, if you're concerned about 4 different viruses, that you're treating that water to make sure that those viruses aren't going to come in through that water source. And then these tables just repeat for all 5 water sources. So if you only have 1, you just complete 1. If you have, 5 or more, then you would complete 1 of these tables for each one. And basically the goal of what we're trying to get at is making sure that for every water source is either secure and there's, no plausible way for pathogen introduction, or that if there is a plausible way, that the facility has in place measures to mitigate that pathogen introduction through that pathway. Okay, so then our next critical control point is number 3, and we're focusing on feed and feed ingredients. So looking around the facility, what feed ingredients, supplements are being fed to the animals, and then making sure that they're not pathways of introduction either. So let's say, so for the first part, it says, do any of the feed or feed ingredients or supplements contain susceptible species for the pathogens of concern? So that could mean that it's like frozen squid, or it could mean that it's a supplement that has like some ground up crustacean in it or something like that. So there's lots of different ways that the susceptible species to the pathogens of concern might be in the feed. But we're just identifying if there are any plausible ways in any form. So if the answer to this is no, then you can skip this section. So let's say that your feed is a pelleted, heat extruded feed that's being, that is being tested and is not coming up, with that is only coming up with negative reports for your pathogens of introduction, pathogens of concern. You can skip this section. Let's say that there's some Artemia that we're using as one of our feed types, and another like pelleted feed that we're not sure if it's quite heat treated or not, the way that it needs to be for the pathogens of concern. So these are the 2 feed types for this example, and we'll complete one of these tables for each one. So for the first one, this would be our Artemia. Describe how the feed ingredients, or supplements have been tested, treated, or processed to inactivate the pathogens of concern. So let's say for our Artemia, we are, it's not being like treated in any way. So what we're doing is, you know, we're receiving or requiring batch testing on mouse is going crazy here. Batch testing that that they're, you know, negative for whatever our pathogens of concern are. Then for our feed, it's a pelleted feed. You know, maybe there is some heat treatment, but we also do additional batch testing to confirm that that the pathogens aren't in that pelleted feed, and being a potential mechanism for introduction. And, you know, in some cases, you know, people will put like the company or the exact heat extrusion process or the freezing process or what have you. And again, it's going to depend on the pathogen. There are some pathogens that you can inactivate with freezing, and there's others that you can't. There's some that you can inactivate with heat, but maybe it has to be at a certain level for a certain period of time. So all of that kind of information is basically the justification for how you as a facility and as accredited vet have confidence that those pathogens aren't coming in through your feed. Mika, I see your hand. I'm almost through this, but we'll get to your question, I promise. All right, so then the 4th section here, the 4th critical control point, is talking about non-human vectors. So does the facility have parasite, pest, predator management and control as appropriate for the pathogens of concern? In some cases, that may include birds or you know, rodents or crabs crawling up off of the beach into your facility, or, you know, the point is there's a variety. So this package isn't intended to be prescriptive as far as, you know, you must have this for predator control or this for pest management or this for parasite management. But as you as the accredited vet, you're looking at, okay, what species do I have? How do these pathogens get transmitted? What are our potential pests or predators or, you know, parasites? And are we making sure that we're hitting all those critical control points to ensure that the diseases aren't coming in through those non-human vectors? So the answer to this has to be yes to meet prem freedom. And then lastly, the last critical control point is fomites and human vectors. So does the facility restrict access for visitors or have a log or provide appropriate PPE for anyone entering the facility? Does the facility ensure that the populations aren't exposed to any incoming shipping containers or water? So again, if you're bringing anything onto the farm, making sure that that is not a source of disease introduction. And does the facility ensure equipment and gear are site specific? So in some cases, that means it, you know, doesn't leave a little region on the farm. In other cases, it's, you know, the tractor is for the entire premises. In other cases, you know, the equipment may only be, you may share it between, you know, 2 adjacent properties, but you're, you know, regularly cleaning and disinfecting, that kind of thing. So again, exactly how the facilities meeting those or addressing that critical control point is up to you as the accredited vet, the aquatic animal health team, and the facility to determine what makes the most sense for your production system, for your animals, for your pathogens of concern. But for all of these fomites and human vectors, all of these critical control points need to be met. And then the last bit here is just extra tables in case you need them. So some facilities only have maybe 1 or 2 feed ingredients, whereas others use, you know, a lot of different supplements and stuff like that. So this is just extra tables in case they're needed. If you don't need them, you don't have to fill them out. All right, and then that is the end of the pre-inspection package. So let me just pull back up my presentation real quick. Okay, so that's kind of going through piece by piece, completing each section. All right, and then there's just a few things for additional information and resources that we want to touch on. All right, so for resources, here are some of the just resources that we've talked a bit about just during this presentation already, and I just wanted to highlight exactly where you can find all of them. So we talked about how, you know, one of the accredited vet's responsibilities is, you know, when they're issuing health certificates, that it's a legal document, that they're attesting that the requirements on the health certificate are true, and that when they're issuing that certificate. Additionally, when the accredited vet is, you know, having oversight of a facility and making sure that, you know, they're inspecting the animals regularly, and also and just having knowledge of the facility when they're signing these legal documents, all of that is part of our, is outlined in our Code of Federal Regulations, specifically Part 9 CFR Part 161. I think that you can definitely Google like 9 CFR Part 61, and you can find the full Code of Federal Regulations online. We also have just the specific snippets about accredited veterinarian responsibilities on our APHIS webpage under our accreditation pages. So Lauren, if you don't mind posting that link in the chat as well, you can either refer to that, or you can, you know, go straight to the online Code of Federal Regulations. For the export health certificate, so in order to find the health certificate that you may need for a given country is going to be on our IREGs page, as well as any country-specific parameters that dictate how to meet prem freedom for that country. I mentioned a few examples like Peru and Canada. Those are going to also be on the country-specific pages on the IREGs. For those countries or markets that don't have their own prem freedom parameters or default to the OIE or WOA, then the requirements for prem freedom are in our APHIS definition. That's what I was showing you earlier, which is currently on our website, but also will be on the new aquatic webpage. We also have a laboratory export testing guidance that goes through what type of laboratory has to conduct what type of testing for export. Again, the reason that we have a document kind of explaining which lab for which pathogens is because it will depend on the destination country. So in the health certificates or written requirements, it will say, it will either indicate that, you know, the lab is, you know, essentially has to be an APHIS approved lab, and we give some examples in that of certificate language in that guidance, or maybe it doesn't need to be an APHIS approved lab, but it needs to be an approved lab, and that's what, you know, here's the criteria for an approved lab, that kind of thing. So that's currently on our website, but will also be transferred over to the new page. Our Prem Freedom evaluation package, as I mentioned, will be on our new page in the next couple days. And then also with, you know, with any questions, also having the client being able to identify which APHIS Veterinary Services Office covers that state or region. I think Lauren put that link in the chat at the very beginning, but and that's also on our website, and you can just use the drop-down menu to find your state. Okay, so I just wanted to here at the end go through an example, just to kind of tie all the pieces that we've talked about with this Prem Freedom package, as well as the RAFE approval, into a real world example, so to speak. So let's say that we have a facility that wants to export rainbow trout to Romania. And so the first thing that we're going to do is look at the certificate requirements. When we look at the certificate, we see that Romania is a EU member state, so they use the EU health certificate. And when we look at for rainbow trout, the EU considers rainbow trout to be susceptible to epizootic hematopoietic necrosis, or EHN, and infectious salmon anemia. Those are the two that are listed as the pathogens of concern for rainbow trout specifically, and also specifically when exporting to Romania, because Romania only has measures in place for those two pathogens of concern. So we've figured out, okay, we need the EU health certificate, and we need to meet Prem Freedom for EHN and ISA. So then the next step is RAFE approval. So because we are exporting to the EU, which requires facility oversight, and also because we have to meet Prem Freedom to go to Romania, then our facility needs to be RAFE approved. So that means that we need to go through, submit the pre-inspection package, be inspected, and receive our RAFE approval letter that says that our facility meets the export requirements to ship rainbow trout to Romania. Now, additionally, since we need to meet premises freedom, we're also going to need to submit a premises freedom evaluation package. So our accredited vet is going to sit down and make sure that all of those testing and biosecurity components are all being met for EHN and ISA. Those are maybe Romania is our only market, and so those are the only pathogens of concern that we have right now. So the accredited vet will go through and verify that all of those requirements have been met. The EU doesn't have their own parameters for Prem Freedom. They defer to the OIE. So that means that when we're filling out the Prem Freedom package, we would select the 95% confidence, 2% prevalence per the APHIS definition. So we would select that. We would select EHN and ISA in the pathogens of concern, and then make sure that there were critical control points to prevent the introduction of those two pathogens into the facility. So once the accredited vet completed that Prem Freedom evaluation package, submitted it to the local APHIS office, they will issue a Prem Freedom letter that will say this facility meets 95% confidence, 2% prevalence for rainbow trout and EHN and ISA. Now we've done our two different packages, and now it's time for certificate endorsement. So we're ready to ship. We fill out the EU health certificate, and instead of sending along test results with the health certificate, we're going to send the premises freedom letter. So the APHIS office is going to receive your health certificate, and they're going to see, okay, rainbow trout, Romania, they have to meet Prem Freedom for EHN and ISA. Instead of looking at 2 years worth of testing history for EHN and ISA, your premises freedom letter is that proof of documentation that the facility, is attesting that they meet Prem Freedom at this level for these pathogens. So they support each other. The APHIS veterinarian that's endorsing your health certificate will also see, okay, the EU requires RAFE approval. So they will look up your facility on within our APHIS system to see, okay, yep, my facility is approved for rainbow trout to Romania. So those are all kind of the checks and balances, how they all come together to then, for that shipment to then go to Romania, we have confidence that it's meeting the testing levels that it needs to, that it's meeting the health certificate requirements in addition to Prem Freedom, that it's coming from a RAFE approved facility, and that, you know, we have documentation to demonstrate that all of those different areas have been verified and completed prior to export. So in summary, thanks for sticking with me this long. So in summary, you know, to obtain Prem Freedom, just a reminder, it takes a minimum of 24 consecutive months of both testing and biosecurity. And that for this Prem Freedom evaluation package, it really relies on the accredited veterinarian. And so the accredited vet sitting down with the aquatic animal health team to verify all of this information, completing and signing the package, resubmitting the package on an annual basis. And also, since the accredited vet is attesting that Prem Freedom is being met, for whatever pathogens and for whatever species are selected in that package, making sure that they feel that they understand and that they're verifying compliance with the Prem Freedom requirements, and that if anything changes, they're notifying APHIS, whether there's a suspect detection or, you know, there's a big change in the critical control points or something like that. Maybe you had to do something, you know, at the facility to move, a structure around or something like that, and needed to change the critical control points, that kind of thing. Just anything that could impact or potentially could impact the Prem Freedom health status of that facility. With that, I'm going to stop talking. I see some questions in the chat. I really thank you guys for taking the time, for sticking with me. Hopefully it wasn't too boring to listen to. I wanted to really make sure that we went through all of those criteria and kind of gave you some additional explanation if needed. I'm happy to take any questions now if you have them. I also want to my contact information is up here on the screen, but also Dr. Lauren Harris is our new staff officer for aquatic animal exports and will be our RAFE program coordinator. So I wanted to be sure to include her information as well, since these Prem Freedom evaluation packages are part of the RAFE 2.0 update that we are rolling out and will be in effect on Monday the 18th.